This video is a short version of Lesson 1 of British North America. You will see the note-taking sheet down here. I've skipped ahead in the slides to number 8, where we start getting the king's perspective. In here, I encourage you to write in the name of each act and a sentence or two about why the king put this act in place. So the first one we're going to look at is the Royal Proclamation of 1763. It was actually what was put in place at the end of the 7 Years' War. So what he did is he reduced the size of Quebec here in order to weaken the French so they would be less likely to rebel. And he gave territory here to the First Nations people in thanks for what they had done, but also to appease their population so that they were content. A little while later, there's a Stamp Act of 1765. This is put in place because the king felt that the colonies needed to start paying for themselves. So he put a tax on, and that tax created revenue. It gave them money to start paying for a lot of the services they needed in that area. This stamp was put on all legal documents, and in paying for that stamp, you ended up paying into the taxes. The British, or sorry, I should say right now, the people who were getting upset in the 13 colonies, they started saying things like no taxation without representation, because they were upset that the king put this in place without them having any say in it. But as far as the king was concerned, it needed to happen so that the tax dollars from that colony paid for that colony instead of him having to pay for it. Because people started to get a little testy about the taxes put on the legal documents, and they were starting to have little skirmishes or rebellious like protests, things like that, then the king asserted his authority in the Townshend Acts of 1767. He put taxes on anything coming into the colonies by ship, and that was a whole lot of stuff. Now, that made the people even more upset, so gradually he reduced things down to just tax on tea, but people are still upset. So as far as the king's perspective for the Townshend Acts, it was to, again, continue collecting taxes, but also to show that he was in charge. Then finally, we've now reached 11 years after the end of the 7 Years' War. And the king is realizing that there's a lot of rebellious thoughts in the 13 colonies. He's worried that a rebellion is coming, and he needs to have somebody fighting on his side if a rebellion does come to happen. So he gives Quebec more land, and he gives them more rights. Because it's been 11 years since he fought against the French, and they've been good subjects the whole time. Nobody's rebelled. So he feels he can trust them. And he gives them all these things. And it actually does make Quebec pretty happy. However, it makes the 13 colonies even more ticked off because they just fought against the French. And now the French are given all of these rights and land. And the British, who actually fought on behalf of Britain, are just getting taxes instead of other things. So if you were present during this class, we actually did a little activity where I became a lot more strict, and it prompted different reactions in people. Some people were content because they were fine. They say, well, the teacher's in charge. It's no big deal. I can do it. Some of them were neutral, where they might have been feeling one way or the other, maybe even a bit confused, but they weren't really willing to act on it. They were going to go along with things. And then there were those who were upset and who were not going to do what was said or all these new strict things. And they were actually going to start speaking out. That's the way the 13 colonies population was feeling. Some were upset and ready to rebel. Some were kind of sitting on the fence, not really sure what side they wanted to pick, or at least not ready to pick a side. And then some were fine with the decisions made by the king. Well, the Americans, still the British at this point because they haven't become Americans yet. Those who are rebellious decide that they really don't have that much of a choice. They can either just do what the king says or they can fight back. And they're deciding to actually fight back. Now, we need to clarify. I've been calling them rebels because I find that that's a little bit easier term to remember. But we can also call them patriots. There are two names for them. And if you were to see them in uniform, they would be wearing blue. There are the loyalists, who are British, and they wear red. And they are the ones who were content in that previous scenario. So the rebels thought that the best place to attack first would be Quebec City, because the French fought against the British king in the 7 Years' War, and therefore, of course, they'd want to fight against him again. Well, it just so happened that the people in Quebec didn't want to fight against them, as in a fight against the British. They had just fought against the British in the 7 Years' War, and they lost. They really don't want to go through that again and lose again. They had also just gotten all of those lands and rights, so they didn't want to lose those. They were happy with them. Another important aspect of this is that with all these rebellious behaviors, there were people who became loyalists and moved up here to this area. That's why we have Loyalist College. That's why we have Loyalist Parkway, the road that runs by. We also have Moyer Secondary School being named Myers Creek. Well, John Myers was one of those loyalists who came up here. This is a loyalist region. People who were either loyalists or didn't look patriot enough, or they didn't seem rebellious enough. They were harassed, physically assaulted, which could be like tarring and feathering, and they were publicly embarrassed. Their homes could be destroyed, looted, and possessions destroyed or stolen. Because these rebels aren't really organized. They're kind of like mobs at times. Not always, but at times. And therefore, when they got upset, the mob can kind of get out of control, and they do a lot of aggressive things. Those who were in the rebellious groups felt that this was like war. They were fighting back, and their target were the people who seemed to be loyal to Britain because they wanted to target Britain. Now, there is a video that I have. You can watch it on your own time. There's another link to it right down here, the John Adams clipped video. It's a good one because you will see how the crowd turned on the person who was asking questions that made him appear loyal. And you can see why the loyalists wanted to move, because they didn't want to be in danger to their family. Or they didn't want to be in danger, and they didn't want their family in danger either. Just to take a look at this, this was supposed to be someone who was a suspected loyalist. They were tarred to make their bodies sticky. It was kind of hot, it hurt. And they were feathered, as in you're a chicken, you might as well look like one if you're not willing to fight for your rights. Because taxes were on tea, and tea was typically a British drink, part of the reason why they drink a lot of coffee in the US now instead of tea. Tea was forced down his throat. This was considered the Liberty Tree, and they would hang people from that Liberty Tree to show that they were free and liberating themselves. So now if we get down to this note-taking, you've got those 4 acts in here, the king's perspective and why he did these things. Over here, the French perspective, well, they didn't want to go through a war again when they'd recently lost, and they didn't want to, they were happy with the rights and land that they had just been given. In these boxes, I'd like you to represent the 3 mixed opinions in the people of the 13 colonies. In one box, you can have the rebels, also known as the patriots, who were really upset, and I'd like you to explain why they were upset. They felt like they hadn't been appreciated with their efforts fighting on behalf of Britain in the past. They were upset that suddenly they were being asked to pay taxes, and they had never had to do that before, so it seemed unfair. In here, I'd like you to write the neutral group. And it's just that they're not really taking sides. They might have feelings one way or the other, but they're not choosing a side just yet. Later they will be forced to. And then down here we have the ones who are content, otherwise known as the loyalists. And they could be in this group for a number of reasons. Might be that they actually are loyal to the king and they feel that his rule is just. Maybe they are not wanting to fight. They want a different solution. They don't feel that fighting is the answer. Maybe they simply want to protect their family, or they even want the free land up in British North America. Down here, we're going to write about how our identity as a country has been shaped by the loyalists. If you think about it, of these groups, it was the group that was choosing not to fight, the ones who were choosing another option other than aggression, that came here to Canada. If you think about our Canadian identity, we're typically known to be peacemakers, not as an aggressive country, but more as a country that helps others. And you could say that that stems from our loyalists, because back in that time, the loyalists chose another option other than fighting. That's part of the reason why our country today is known for helping others, is known for being a polite country, or for being welcoming. Another example to illustrate that is what I've got up in here, where we became our own country, Dominion of Canada, through negotiation with Britain, as opposed to fighting against Britain. I mean, we did remain a Commonwealth. That was a compromise. However, or it could be seen as a compromise, I guess, that desire to find another alternative other than fighting can be another example of how the loyalists have shaped our identity.